Welcome back to K.L.A.R.A podcast, where we dive into the latest in film, media, and industry trends. Today, we are unpacking some of the biggest shifts happening in cinema right now, how film festivals are grappling with political tensions, the struggles of independent filmmakers in shrinking market, and the rapid consolidation of streaming platforms. But more importantly, we are asking, what's the next for the future of film? Well, first, we are going to talk about the film festivals and the political climate. It's no secret that film has always been political, but this year festivals have become battlegrounds for ideological debates. Although personally I've not attended Berlinale Film Festival, I've been following it very closely from the perspective of my colleagues, and also I have had a chance to attend IFFR myself through the amazing program Media Inclusion Scheme, which I highly recommend you to apply, but also equally I have some doubts and things that I need to discuss. That are important for this subject, because this is a topic that many of the journalists are very afraid to talk about, but I'm not one of them. And this platform has always been and always will be promoted as a platform that invites people to think freely and to think for themselves, and also to discuss and debate anything that it's on their mind, and topics that, surrounding their reality, and something that it's always been put under the carpet. But I do have to confess that it's no secret that film has always been political. But this year, festivals become battlegrounds for ideological debates, as I previously said. Especially with a scary situation in the political landscape where Mr. Trump is doing and putting accusations on Zelensky, where the EU is being silent on the on the Serbian protests of their students in Belgrade and in Novi Sad and across different cities, whereas the word in itself, Gaza, is already a controversial word to say in the stage in the Berlinale, where AfD has a good chance of actually getting the vote, and where the German people are going to the polls due to the upcoming elections. So many things are happening, and I'm here to address them. Although this podcast is not always necessarily going to address political topics, it's a podcast that I'm running it, and I want to feel free and express the way how I'm currently feeling about this industry and what has been happening. I love the film industry. I love attending the markets, but we do need to discuss some of the facts that cannot be forgotten. At IFFR, when I was there, I saw a bold selections of various films. Some of them you're going to hear in my other audio episodes, like Wind Talk to Me by Stefan Đorđević, or even a short film by Quentin, my dear friend, who has directed a short film called Kokićao. It's a Dutch short film, and I really recommend you to see it. It had also a premiere in Berlinale as well. But other than that, I saw another film that is actually from my home country, Croatia, at IFFR, called Fiume o Morte. It's a documentary exploring nationalist ambitions in post-World War I in Europe, and raptures a chilling portrait of religious extremism. The film proves that festivals remain a space for daring and urgent storytelling. I was discussing this with my colleague from Trieste Film Festival, how this is one of the few films that it absolutely does require not just film historians, but also a historian in itself to really give in-depth context of what this film is about. I think this is something that was definitely missing at IFFR, and I wish that that was present. But luckily, I think the audience really was able to understand the film more in depth, especially the festival director being from this part of Croatia originally, and also the director itself, who really explained very well the historical context of the city of Rijeka and why this film is important to them, and why Fiume o Morte, which means Rijeka or death. But at Berlinale, the stakes felt even higher. Ethan Hawke raised alarms about the state of independent film funding, while a Hong Kong filmmaker's pro-Palestine speech sparked backlash. This is something that I remember when I saw the video. My apologies if I cannot remember the name of the filmmaker, but it has been ruling around the social media. It's something that made me think in what kind of world we live in. It's completely insane to me that we live in a world where even a word in itself, Gaza, is a controversy. And it's actually pretty terrifying. And this is exactly why the platforms like this exist, because although we are going to discuss many other things that, are relevant for this generation or topics that interest me as a host, and please, if you have any topics that you want to suggest or that you think that are valuable and important in this landscape, I'm happy to hear, whether it's about self-improvement, cinema, new mediums, social media, AI, whatever. It's really important to hear also my audience opinions and what you guys think about this. And in general, what topics are actually interesting for you. But because of the political situation right now, I couldn't ignore the ongoing events at these two important film festivals. And on top of that, the festival director Trisha Tuttle's presence at a vigil for Israeli hostages highlighted the delicate balancing act festivals must maintain. This is something that also has been very noticeable for anyone who has been following the festival circuit. As you all may well know, in ITFA, it was a huge discussion in, if I'm not remembering incorrectly, I think it was end of 2023, where I will leave you a link with few articles that mention this controversy about the Palestinian filmmakers being excluded from the program almost completely. And it's something that still quite fascinates me that was even allowed. But yeah, to continue with the train of thoughts that I wanted to say, because if I just keep myself on this part, I think this episode could last for almost 2 hours. Even in Asia, where festivals historically avoided over political conflicts, the industry is changing, thankfully. The Busan International Film Festival, for instance, operating in South Korea, is facing its own internal political tensions. But this is only to highlight because in Asia, this has not been as prevalent as it is on the western part of Europe. So it's really good to know before you go to any of the film festivals, especially in Southeastern Asia, that maybe perhaps it might be more accepted, but it's also with a precaution. I do want to impose a discussion question that I'm happy to discuss in the comments or in whatever format, in a way how you feel. It would be great if you can put it in the comments of the episode or write to me on my email, or also you can put it in the Instagram polls. I'm happy to do that as well. It is, how much responsibility do film festivals have to take up political stances? Should they remain neutral, or is cinema inherently political? This is something that I'm actually deeply curious to hear from my, not just audience in general, listeners, viewers, from my colleagues, from my friends. I really want to hear what is your takeaway on this. Because with this year, never did I thought in a million years it would come politically this extreme. The wave of accusations, the waves of inacts, the waves of passivity, the ways how certain festivals are doing more damage than good. It's something that I think it's really worth thinking about. And I'm now going to start with the second segment, which is the business of film and shrinking market. Beyond politics, another reality setting in the business of independent film is in trouble. EFM, or Berlinale's European film market, was quieter than expected, echoing the lukewarm energy at Sundance. While a few high-profile films secure deals, like Good Sex by Lena Dunham, many independent films struggle to find buyers. This is something that I'm actually finding super surprising, because I've had comments from my colleagues that they told me very positive feedback, very positive experiences. So actually, it's really interesting to hear this line of thought. I'm actually curious, what do you guys think about this? Because, as I said previously, I didn't have a chance to attend Berlinale. This is just compilation of the thoughts and feelings, and also from some of my colleagues, because everyone, of course, had a very different experience, but I really tried my best to kind of compile all into one with my additional experience in Rotterdam. So, that being said, theatrical distribution is shrinking. Streamers, once the great hope for indie filmmakers, are pulling back on acquisitions. And with public funding facing cuts, the question becomes, if traditional paths to audiences are disappearing, what alternatives do filmmakers have? This is something that in many of the workshops that I've attended, we have been discussing, because it is the most asked question, I would say, nowadays. What is actually the alternative for filmmakers today, where traditional paths to audiences are disappearing? And I would like to use an example of the series called SRAM, or A Shame, based on the Norwegian franchise SKAM, that had a very good distribution cycle after the series was released, and quite a high rating, and also really managed to find its right audience, despite the comments, despite the fact that the way of the distribution is not traditional. It actually turned out to be more successful than the creators anticipated. Although I'm not close to the creators of the series, I know a few of my friends who worked on the series, which shout out to them. Shout out to Sara, shout out to Larissa, and also shout out to all the actors who are great, by the way. I wanted to mention this because it's something that I think it's really important for people to know. Mainly because it's a series that uses all the social media platforms as as the series is conceptualized on the actual real time. The clips from the episode, because each episode is 20 minutes, are being released at the actual time as in the series. So if the scene was shot in the storyboard at 7 a.m., that's when it will be released, exactly at 7 a.m. So this is something that is really interesting and completely different from what I've noticed, especially for a series that targets plus 13-year-olds and above, which is in nowadays the most hardest audience to actually get to watch your content. So what they did successfully was, first of all, they made profiles for their characters on Instagram, which made it a very interesting move, because when the original franchise was shot, social media was not that much yet on the rise. At that time, Facebook was really popular, but this made it even more real, because the actual characters were going to quite a few events in Zagreb, where the singers and the music producers from the show were doing the actual events with the characters and with the actors. So this is something that made it really interesting and very, very original approach to its distribution circle. Although the show was played on the Croatian national television, every episode was released on YouTube, because the series in itself has a huge audience already. I think this is something that definitely helped. But it's worth noting that the way how this was distributed is completely different than the classical series, or if you went to picture the series Mania in Lille, it would be a very different story. So I'm just giving you here an example of how it is possible to think outside of the box, but not many people are willing to do that, or are afraid, even not of not being successful, but purely the comments of their peers, because a lot of people here were super skeptical how this will go. And then, in fact, it turned out to be a bigger success than people thought, because it exploded on social media. And today, if this is not the case for your platform, for your service, or for your content, most likely it will not get the buzz it deserves. And I'm here being very candid with you, because how is it possible that a group of people can make this show so successful? It is true that it is a franchise, that it has already a big audience, but huge audience also comes from the domestic audience. Almost everyone that I've talked to in the recent months from the region knows about the show. Everyone knows about it. And everyone had quite, even if they didn't like it, they knew about it already. And they did benefited from the fact that it wasn't, and they were all surprised by the fact that it was not distributed in a classical way. And this is what we need to start thinking about. How do we do it outside of the classical approach? Because what is happening right now is that the classical approach is not working anymore. We are living in a very dual reality and society today, where if we don't think outside of the box, we will get stuck. And this is something that I really want at least for you to think about. I'm not saying that you should agree with me, but it's something that I find at least something worth noting. What was I saying? Yeah, I mean, it's important for you to know, because theatrical distribution is shrinking. Unfortunately, that's the case. I have to be honest. Not many, especially after pandemic, not many people are going to the cinema as they used to. And I know that you all know this, that streamers, once the great hope for indie filmmakers, are pulling back on acquisitions, as previously said. And with public funding facing cuts, the question becomes if traditional paths are the ones for the audience. Are those disappearing? What are the alternatives for filmmakers to have? These are, now I'm repeating myself, of course, but I want you to really get that in mind. I really want that to sink in with you. Like, if traditional paths to audiences are disappearing, what are the alternatives to filmmakers? What I've just previously said was one example. Now I know I'm very aware that I'm rambling, but really do think about it. And I would like to impose some discussion questions, if that's okay. And that is, streaming services become more selective. Could we see a return to community-driven screenings, digital first releases, or even decentralized funding models like blockchain? So please have a thought for yourself. I would really love you to kind of give some insight into this, and please let me know your thoughts. Then the segment third is India streaming consolidation and the future of global platforms. While some markets shrink, others consolidate. India is a prime example. Jio Hotstar, born from the merger of Voot, Disney Plus, Hotstar, and Jio Cinema, now dominates the Indian streaming space, serving over 500 million users. It's a massive platform, but it raises concerns. Fewer streaming competitors means fewer buyers for high-end original films. Netflix and Amazon remain in the game, but they too are becoming selective. The question now is whether consolidation leads to greater accessibility or if it stifles creative diversity by limiting funding options. See, this point is really interesting for me because I didn't really know much about Indian cinema before, especially the new wave of Indian cinema, pardon me. So please do think about this point, because this is something that I often find from my colleagues, especially based in the West, that they don't really pay much attention. I didn't, unfortunately, until recently. So I'm not going to pretend like I know everything, but do please get a bit of more of a research and think about. It is a point that one of my colleagues addressed, and I had to mention it because I found it really interesting and really fascinating. One of the discussion questions I would like to impose is, should streaming platforms prioritize local content or aim for global reach? And how can independent filmmakers survive in an era where only a few platforms control distribution? This is a really important question, and I'm going to connect it to my country, Croatia, where I was born and raised, but I have lived abroad for almost 4.5 years in several different places. And I would like to address something that's really important here. I think there is no really a right or wrong answer. I think it heavily depends where you're from. It depends a lot on the political landscape of your government funding, because especially in Europe, this is where most of the funding for the filmmakers comes from, especially if you're going to the national fund. In most often cases, if you want to do co-productions, that's the only way of doing it. That's the case, for example, in Croatia, in most of the Balkanic countries, such as in Bosnia, Montenegro, Serbia, Slovenia, North Macedonia, Kosovo, Albania, you name it. At least that's the case where I'm from. So a lot of these funding bodies do prioritize local content simply because of its relatability and because of its money budget. Mainly because most of the funding bodies barely can afford to fund the local films and the local stories. So aiming for the global reach is very ambitious. It's not impossible, but I do have to be honest, the ones who have succeeded in that mission have usually had either executive producers like Antonetta Alamat-Cusiano, with having Martin Scorsese as her executive producer, and Rodrigo Teixeira from Brazil and the United States, who also produced Call Me By Your Name, for example, and many other great classics. She's one of the few who had to search for the money outside of Croatia as well, on top of everything. For example, the film Who Could Not Remain Silent, our short film by Nebojša Sljepčević, he had to go on several co-productions, funding competitions, and apply for their call-outs, because he knew that he couldn't finance the film, although it's a short film, and it's nominated for an Oscars this year. So it's completely insane. So having said that, I think in the case of India, it is quite different because it's a huge market, it's a huge country. And I do think in their case, I think there should be some balance between global reach and local content, considering also the influence of Bollywood. But I think if you translate this into smaller country markets, also considering the Baltic countries like Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, or maybe Czech Republic or Slovakia, in Central Europe as well, then you need to really take into consideration different factors, because it will differ per country, even per city is also quite different, because I know the commissioning boards in Italy, for example, are all very different from each other. So it's worth noting that. And I think independent filmmakers can survive in platforms where to control the distribution, but I also really think it's important that they are super hyper aware of what they're putting out and what is their target audience and who they're speaking to when it comes to distributors, because not all distributors have the same values as them or have the exact same intention as them and know the way how to do it in a way that pleases the filmmaker. Some are really excellent at that, but many of them will use their own way to do it and will not really include, I guess, I wouldn't say include, but you need to keep in mind that distributors are always thinking of the money first and of the profitable value of the film, not just the filmmakers itself. And sometimes I notice they very much use them only for the PR purposes, which is of course valuable and important because, you know, they need to promote the film, they need to create a PR buzz. But it's worth noting that as a filmmaker, do be careful who you're pitching for a distributor your film, because not everyone will understand your requirements and your film in the same way as you will. So bear that in mind. And please, for the discussion questions for this part, I would like to repeat again what could be worth thinking about. Should streaming platforms prioritize local content or aim for global reach? And how can independent filmmakers survive in an era where only a few platforms control distribution? Let me know in the comments what you think. And going back to the fourth segment and the final one, is decline of theatrical cinema. Is it a global trend? So The decline of cinema isn't just a Western issue. Singapore recently saw another major theater closure. In China, despite the massive success of Netza 2, box office revenue dropped 23% last year. That's insane, Jesus Christ. While some markets like Indonesia and Vietnam are rebounding, others like Singapore are just 60% of pre-pandemic levels. This raises a pressing question. If theaters continue to close and streaming services buy fewer indie films, where does that leave filmmakers? Smaller budgets? More reliance on public funding? Or a complete reinvention of the distribution model? Oof, this is something that also came into my head when we were going back to the previous point. It's incredibly interesting to hear how this is the case, because many of the people who are not in this business don't really think about this, but they're hyper aware that they would rather still stay at home and not actually go to the cinema, even though they can, purely because of its convenience. But exactly as said in my text, this raises a pressing question. Is it that theaters will start closing, not just in Singapore, but in Europe? I mean, I see it in Africa also. I see it in Australia, in America. For example, a good example is the Prince Charles Cinema in London. What the fuck? You know, like, sorry, but not sorry for swearing. I mean, it's one of the most legendary cinemas in the entire United Kingdom. And then it is being closed. I mean, not at the moment it's closed, but it is being pressured to close. And at the moment, it seems like the only way how to save cinemas and its theatrical distribution is by purely relying on its people, relying on the public funding. Yes, because clearly only the people are going to be able to save it. And they have been raising funds for this. And it's something that really breaks my heart, because whenever I go back to London to visit my family and my friends, the first place I go to is Prince Charles Cinema. And for example, in December, I watched K.L.A.R.A on 35mm, and one of their events are the biggest, most attended events in the country. And it just makes me honestly so mad that this is the case, that, you know, big chains and billionaires and businessmen are only thinking about the profit side of things. I mean, unfortunately, that is the reality we're living in, because another good example is a Croatian cinema, K.L.A.R.A, which has been closed since 2019, and they haven't rebuilt anything. They haven't done nothing. And it has been closed. Unfortunately, the people were not able to save it purely because of the political reasons. If you want me to do a separate episode on this, how can we save cinemas, I think I would be very happy to do that. And also to talk to some of my colleagues as well, who are much more knowledgeable about this as well. I'm just saying, I just wanted to clarify, this is all my personal comments. These are not all of the things that I've just said are pure facts. Please think for yourself. Also do your research on behalf of your own brain and behalf of your own creative mind, because what I'm saying is just also my reality and what I've experienced it personally through my lenses of my friends, also through my own lens by attending IFFR. It's something that I really want to make clear. But it's incredibly sad. Honestly, it's really heartbreaking that Prince Charles Cinema in London, for example, is one of the few that is being threatened to close. Because if cinemas are going to get closed, you know, where does that leaves filmmakers, film workers, film festivals as well? Where they're going to hold their venues? Where are going to be films projected? You know, it leaves a whole room for discussion and a whole big gap of unanswered questions and issues. So it's important to think about it. I would like to repeat those discussion questions. Please write me your thoughts and always form your opinion, because having your own opinion right now is one of the few things that still cannot be bought, as well as air, as well as death, as well as your mind. And I would love for you to kind of, so we can discuss this together and see where does this leave us all together. Should streaming platforms prioritize local content or aim for global reach? And how can independent filmmakers survive in an era where only a few platforms control distribution? And for the part that I was just saying, because I just realized I read the previous part. I'm so sorry. Could we see a resurgence of a micro-budget filmmaking and direct-to-consumer models through platforms like Patreon, Substack, or even NFTs? Before that, before we go to closing thoughts, I would like to say that micro-budget filmmaking is very much in existence right now, and having direct-to-consumer models is becoming more popular than ever. I mean, good examples are many of the YouTubers and many of the podcasters and even entrepreneurs who do this, because I think what is often lacking in cinema space and sometimes is that direct communication with its audience. This is why having experts who specialize in audience research are becoming more important than ever, because we live in a landscape where we have so much access to the most amount of information in human history, yet we still struggle to contextualize and curate our audience's preferences. Not always preferences, but I guess reaching them is what I would like to kind of, I guess, highlight. And this is something that I really find valuable to talk about and to discuss, because it is often, I wouldn't say underestimated, but it's not, but many people don't dedicate enough time to this. And this is something that, for example, when I was watching SRAM, I noticed, or a shame in English, that they really, really, really dedicated 2 years of research for their audience. It is very obvious they've researched their audience heavily, that they've really got into the minds, the brains, the music, the style of the people who are they pitching this project and who is it for. This is something that I was super impressed, because oftentimes, especially in the landscape of series now for teenagers and for kids, especially before, it would happen so often in the United States specifically, where they would take actors and actresses, and maybe even non-binary people or transgender actors or actresses, who simply were completely, like, almost 3 times older, looked like that, and they still acted as teenagers. To me, this is something that I am super annoyed about it, by the way. It's not cute. It looks heavily cringe. And I am completely against it, because I really think that if you're making something for your audience, it should be the people who are in that age to transcend it authentically. Because what happens very often is that the audience you are doing it for will notice that. They will not like it. They will not appreciate the fact that you're making almost a mockery out of them. And they would rather go to the direct consumer models through platforms like Patreon, Substack, or even NFTs. And this is where it all comes back to, is not doing or acting upon of your own impulses, or being stubborn on your previous strategies or ways how, micro-budget filmmaking functions, or how the direct consumer models are being influenced. No, I think what we should start doing is listening to our targeted audience, and do it in a way that is for them, and do it in a way that it's actually reaching the people that we want to reach. Because what will happen is that nobody will give a F about your film. Nobody will know about your work unless you actually pitch it to the people that should know about it in a way that will reach them. Whether you like it or not, that's the reality. That's the strategy that they've used because they know this is how they're going to reach. I mean, this is why it exploded on TikTok. This is why it exploded on YouTube Shorts. Because they know where this audience is. If you want to know what someone else is doing, especially if you want to get more in-depth insight into your audience, you have to know how this audience behaves, what they're doing. And I feel like especially in festivals, oftentimes I would hear this from my colleagues, it's almost like they don't want to admit that this is the reality. They're ashamed that this is where their time goes into, where their kids are going to be at. But this is where they will actually hear about the film. This is where they will hear about, I don't know, the episode of White Lotus or whatever, We need to actually start thinking more creatively where people actually find out about your film. Because, for example, I noticed when I was going in Vienna several times, what is very popular is the actually QR codes sticker QR codes on films. I don't remember any single person using it as their own strategy for the distribution of their own film, especially if it's a popular film. Maybe few of them I've seen on postcards when they would leave it at a festival press desk. But, for example, at least here in Croatia, it's not popular at all. We need to start being more creative in this sense. Because if we don't do that, we're going to get stuck. And I've seen so many people who are so caught up that it has to be in this way. Why? Who the F says that it has to be that way? It's your effing film. It's your project. Excuse my language. But people don't understand that if we don't start speaking out on the actual problems in this industry, nothing will change. Nothing will change. And I'm so tired of listening to the same things, same narratives. No. And I think it's easy to look at these trends and feel pessimistic. Yes, it is. But festivals can be politically fraught. Funding is drying up. Streaming is consolidating. And cinemas are closing, which is a very sad reality, but it needs to be addressed. This is why fundings for cinema exhibition people are important, like Chichiai that is doing, fundings for screenwriters, for directors. One of the good things about working in the European landscape, at least, is if anything, more increase of labs are rising, more increase of schemes are happening in the industry. And this is something that was not the case, I believe, in the last, maybe 4 years ago it was, but not to that such degree. Now it's finally happening because what I often see is that filmmakers are deeply struggling to break in the industry, especially if you're coming from a small place. So, having said that, do apply to the workshops that are available to you. Or even if they are not, they most likely the national funding body will give you the money in some shape or form. Because, we can easily get in that loop that, everything is, going to, I don't know where. You know where. But all the points that I've addressed previously, they're important. They're important. You do need to know about them because this is what is happening right now in the industry. I'm so tired of hearing this glamorization that everything is perfect, that this industry is amazing. It is, but it has its own problems. It has its own perceptions that are not always right, that are not always supported. And I really want that everyone who is listening to this that understands that, yes, you can be successful, but you can also be aware of what is happening right now. Because if you're not, you're going to fall into a trap thinking and start glamorizing everything what festivals and people in the industry are doing. Festivals are great for a reason, but they have their own flaws too. They're not perfect. And I want to make this very clear. My experience in Rotterdam was amazing. I had amazing time, although I barely slept at all, which is, normal for a festival people, We go for festivals for a reason, knowing that most of the time we won't sleep. But, history tells us that cinema is an art form that refuses to die. It simply evolves. And this is something that I really, really saw in Rotterdam. And this is why I love their festival, because it's a cinema that always taught me something different. At least what I saw there, everything that I remember from IFFR, I still remember it until this day, because it's nothing I can compare to. Sometimes I go to festivals and I notice that certain films are becoming a pattern, or they have a similar attributes or, directors that are attached to these festivals. And what I love about IFFR is that every time I go, I see completely different types of films. I mean, obviously, for example, I went to see Midnight Shorts. Most of the films were a bit too artsy for my taste, but there were many of them that were great. For example, by Alexandra Makarova, like Perla, I loved the film. And it was something that I don't remember ever seeing anything similar, especially coming from Slovakia. It's almost unthinkable. At least I cannot remember. If you can, please do write me in the comments. Or the rise of, the cinema from Philippines or from India in general, as we discussed previously. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't talk about the problems that are there and that do exist, because everyone can come to a festival and talk about the good side of the industry. But what about the bad stuff? The stuff that is, stagnated, that it's not as great as it should be. I think it's important that we do have these discussions, and this is something I really want to share with all of you guys who are listening to us, because, new opportunities are emerging, because platforms like Mubi and Criterion Channel are keeping the art house cinema alive. I mean, Focal Training as well, and many others that are really important. Hybrid releases, blending theatrical and digital are becoming more common. And I've named few examples in this episode, and there is many of them. I'm happy to provide more resources on this in the comments. But audiences are proving that when the right film comes along, whether it's Everything Everywhere All at Once or Anatomy of a Fall, they will show up. It's just you need to know who is your audience. I think that's the question that is more relevant than ever, because we live in a world where information is at your hands' disposal. But where is it going? To who is it going? Is the question. And also another thing that I wanted to mention. So the real question also could be, is cinema dying? But rather, how we will redefine it for the future. Really think about it. If we could reshape the film industry from the ground up, what would that look like? Should we rethink distribution funding or even how we tell stories? That's it for today's episode. If you enjoyed the conversation, subscribe and join us next time for more insights into the world of film. And as always, I would love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment or message me with your take on the future of cinema. Thanks for listening and see you next time. Ciao, ciao.